Hi, welcome to the Pursuit of Truth. So, I'm going to talk about the Israel-Hamas, what they're calling war. Obviously, I can see it from two perspectives. What I call the old ways and the new ways. By that I mean old ways as in currently as we live, the system that we live in, everything the way it is. And then the new ways as in seeing things devoid of man-made concepts that don't work and intrinsic parts of, that we're all human beings and the things that we've adopted to become life or existence or the system. So on the system point of view, you can, there's loads of these different examples. I don't know how many I'm going to put on here, from Sky News, speaking to Israelis, speaking to Palestinians. There's no Hamas clips about the situation, showing how this is the problem with polarization. I mean, the idea of, I suppose, is there such a thing as truth, or which side of the story is true, and can both sides be true? And that's what I think is probably actually accurate, in the sense that from the Israeli perspective, they see it as their country historically, and obviously there was a history of what Britain did during the Second World War to create or take away and all that kind of stuff, the occupation, land and all that kind of stuff. So from the Israeli point of view, you can see, coming in, terrorists coming in. Imagine you're at home Saturday morning, people come into your house and they take people hostage or kill them, innocent people. From that perspective, you can see why they would be want to defend their country in the system point of view. I'm not talking about me. And then from a Palestinian type view, from obviously the way that the creation of Israel after the Second World War came about, the occupied land is since 1967. That's against international law, and the international community haven't done anything about that. If you have international law and you're the bastions of it and you want to keep talking about that, and when President Putin does things in Ukraine and Crimea, if you're going to say that, well, you can't do that because that's international law and you have to give it back, and we're going to help support Ukraine to be able to get back their land and sovereignty, then why was the same thing not done with Palestine? Why weren't they supported by the international community as Ukraine have? When we're both talking, as both of them are talking about oppression and taking away of their land. And obviously the problem is that we know, if you think about it, if a country doesn't have its own army, you can use historical examples. I'm not condoning terrorism. What I'm saying is, in the truth reality of things in the system that we live in, not the way I would like to live, but the system that we live in, which is, that I use these examples of why it doesn't work, is that it breeds terrorism, because it's a David and Goliath kind of battle, isn't it? We've seen this in South Africa, we've seen this in Ireland, we see it now in Russia and Ukraine. If you remember, Margaret Thatcher famously called Nelson Mandela a terrorist, I believe. Yes, that's correct, isn't it? Because the ANC, I assume, was seen as that. But look what they were fighting for. They were fighting to get free of what they considered their country. In the system that we live within, it was their country because they were the indigenous people there. And with Ireland, we know the bombing that happened, and in the end it led to peace. But it would be, in the system that we live within, where war is and violence is the way that people get things. It's a bit, when the Western journalists try to attack, like you'll hear Palestinians for trying to, even though they say we're not justifying it, we're just telling you why it happened, and this was something that we warned of. They're talked as oh, well, you're condoning terrorism? No. I'm saying they're saying this is reality of, if you do this to people, they're going to rise up. We've seen this historically. And, you know, how was the Second World War won? It wasn't won by peace treaties. Oh, I wish we lived in a world like that. It was led by lots of violence and lots of blood and lots of deaths and a nuclear bomb. It's unfortunate that that is part of humanity. But to say that one side can't be violent when the other can, not that I'm trying to condone it, because I believe in pacifism, but I believe the problem is in the system that we live in. Yes, if you're going to cut up bits of land and say, I own this, then obviously people are going to be allowed to defend that. But the problem is when bits are taken away and no one does anything about it, it creates this thing. The Israel-Palestine issue, not only does it involve them, but it also involves the West, who have these international laws and haven't, pretend that, oh yes, we're the white hats and, we're the bastions of truth and justice and all that kind of stuff that you hear, that rhetoric spoken by Britain and America's elite. And yet, well, that's not true, is it? Because there's lots of examples of that. Looking at it from my perspective of the new ways, how silly. We're fighting over bits of land that we can never ever own. Well, and which is considered the Holy Land, is not so holy now when so much blood is being spilt over something you can never own. I believe if God could come down and speak, I don't think he'd be happy about this, just because each side wants to own it, to claim some kind of righteousness or chosen people because of verses. Missed the point. So my perspective, I see it as like, well, this is, from the new ways of like human beings, we shouldn't be fighting, shouldn't need to fight over bits of land. We should be able to share it and we should be looking after each other and finding ways to coexist for the benefit of humanity, of each other. So this is, to me, an example that the system that we live in, polarising each other and cutting up bits of land, giving them names and all that, has led to these kinds of things. So we need to get far away from that. We need to get back to the roots of that we're human beings. We found ourselves here. This isn't our earth. We're just guardians of it. We just live here like the animals. And we're no more special than them, just that we can communicate. And we shouldn't use the bad things of us, like murder and killing and possession and greed, to do that. And we don't need that to be able to get each other, to help each other and build the same of whatever, we need to build so that everyone can live a better life. Anyway, I hope YouTube doesn't take that down for me having points of view. But yeah, just to make it clear, I'm not condoning terrorism. I'm not trying to justify it. I'm talking about, from both sides. I can imagine how terrible it is to be both sides. And I feel that probably both sides have been let down by the international community. Not, you can't, because the thing is that the journalists will always try and get the argument from, Hamas terrorists attacked and that's it, and not look what happened before and what may be happening. I don't know, I don't live there, but what I've been listening to is not been very easy living in Gaza for these people who are oppressed. And now obviously, the idea of blanket bombing or however they're going to go in and kill these Hamas terrorists that have hostages. So in an area where they can't leave, they've been told to leave but they can't leave. I mean, that just, and to cut off their electricity and water, like someone said, you can't, what Hamas did is a crime against humanity. Yes, it is. Killing innocent people, killing any people is a crime against humanity. And especially from an Islamic point of view, there's verses about it. To kill one person is to kill all humanity. But then also on the same regard, cutting off their electricity and water, there must be lots of innocent people in Gaza that are now going to die because of these attacks and things. So, two wrongs don't make a right, as it were. One side committing crime against humanity, you can't have the other one. And then you can't have the international community hearing these words, hearing this is what's happening, and not, you have to condemn anything that's against humanity, not just your favourites. You can't just say, oh, well, because they're doing it and they're my favourites, I'm not going to say anything. What should matter is honesty, truth and justice and equality for all human beings, and it all should be sacred. And you should be condemning, yes, the Hamas for their terrorism, but also you need to condemn Israel for how they're going to act now, how they're going to kill innocent people just because they're angry and want revenge. And yeah, I understand why, because, you know, it'd be terrible waking up on Saturday morning shooting and children and women and men getting killed innocently. Have got nothing to do with this. But it doesn't justify the action of just, you know, dropping bombs and going in, all guns blazing. But I don't think you'll hear a condemnation, especially from the United States, of this action, of turning off electricity and water, which I suspect is against international law. Well, we know. The thing is, we know that the occupied land that Israel, you know, since it was in 1967, is against international law. But nothing's being said about it. It's like, oh yeah, let's take 50 years to try and sort that one out. Anyways, let's hear some clips. They're probably not going to be in time order.
Celebrated the attack. These pictures taken in the Jenin refugee camp on the West Bank. However, the Israeli Prime Minister says the enemy will pay a terrible price. Days of conflict and bloodshed await.
Well, the response from Israel continues. We're hearing from Hamas media that Israeli planes have bombed the house of the Hamas Gaza chief, Yahya al-Sinwar. That's taken place in Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip. No reports of any casualties, but Hamas media saying that Israeli planes have carried out a bombing on the house of the Hamas Gaza chief. Let's bring in our international correspondent, John Sparks, now. John, is fighting still ongoing?
Absolutely, yes, it is. As you made reference to there, Jonathan, repeated strikes by the Israeli Armed Force, Air Force on targets in the Gaza Strip, in Gaza City, in other parts of Gaza as well. We have seen multi-story apartment buildings brought down by Israeli strikes. Reportedly, a warning is given by the Israelis first, and we know that multiple Hamas targets have been hit as well. And we can expect the numbers of casualties there to be high. In fact, the health service in Gaza reporting that 200 people or more have lost their lives, well over 1,000 have lost their lives. And yes, there are battles being fought openly still in southern Israel at the moment. The Israeli Defense Forces have not got control of the situation, fighting in at least 5 locations, we understand. 2 particularly fierce battles taking place in a small city called Ofakim in south Israel, in southern Israel, and in Be'eri. It's a kibbutz, a collective farm where the militants reportedly have hostages at that moment. And we have seen some very disturbing pictures from another collective farm, another kibbutz called Kfar Aza, where multiple bodies are laying in a small room in this farm. It is a massacre. It is a slaughter of people lying in pools of blood, a very, very bloody episode, this. And we know from the Israeli emergency services, more than 100 people have lost their lives in Israel.
John, thank you for the moments. Well, I'm joined now by Oren Marmerstein, Israel's Deputy Ambassador to the UK. Good of you to come into the studio. Just update us, if you would, on the situation on the ground. We heard from our correspondent there, a lot of violence still ongoing.
Thank you, Jonathan. This morning, Hamas has started a war, has declared a war on the state of Israel. And it chose to do so at the midst of a Jewish holiday, while people were making their way to synagogues to pray. And it chose to do so in an unprecedented way. I'm not only talking about the scale here and the fact that more than 100 Israelis are murdered, thousands of rockets have been fired at Israeli cities, there's something else. This time, Hamas has decided to wage war against Israelis, civilians, and Hamas is literally on our streets. Hamas is in our streets as we speak. Now, we often speak about the strategic situation, Jonathan. With your permission, I want to pause a second about small stories that tell the big story. A woman, a mother, crying for help. She sees in the window terrorist with a Kalashnikov, and she has 2 young children. She's hiding them in the back room. Young Israelis were trying to go to a party in the countryside. They were slaughtered by terrorists. There's a video that I've seen. It's really disturbing. You see a young girl, I think 15, 16 years old. This is an Israeli girl. She's being dragged in the streets of Gaza, dragged by her hair. Kalashnikov terrorists are pushing her into a room, into a car. And, you know, these girls, these boys are our boys, our girls. And I want to ask you, Jonathan, just to give you an idea what we are dealing with, how would the people of the UK feel if, God forbid, in the streets of Bristol, terrorists will go around trying to hunt down civilians, to shut them down, and to take them into captivity? This is what we're dealing with.
We're just hearing the latest figures coming out of the region. At least 150 Israelis now killed in those Hamas attacks, more than 1,100 Israelis wounded. You spoke of some of the footage, and it is very distressing. We're not able to show the very worst of it, of course. How on earth was this able to happen in a country that has some of the best intelligence services anywhere, in a country that is so well fortified, where security is such a priority? How was it able to happen?
Thank you for this question. I think my job here as a diplomat is to bridge Israel to the UK and vice versa. So in this spirit, I can share with you that right now in Israel, we're not focused on how did this happen. But most simply put, we are focused on one thing: fighting for our lives, protecting our families. This is what we're doing right now. And I think
that is something for the future, and there will be obviously an investigation into what mistakes, I guess, were made. Tell me about this situation regarding hostages, very concerning.
You're absolutely right. This is most disturbing, most concerning. I don't want to get into the exact details. There are hostages, there are many casualties, but I will be very clear. We will do whatever it takes to protect our families. And this is what we are doing right now. And I think this is what every government, the UK government, would be doing in those circumstances. And I want to echo the strong and friendly words of Prime Minister Sunak, who said Israel has an absolute right to defend itself. And this is what we're doing right now. We are defending ourselves.
Let me tell you what Hamas have said today. They say that this assault is because of a 16-year blockade on Gaza, Israeli raids inside West Bank cities, violence at Al-Aqsa, increasing attacks by settlers on Palestinians, the increasing expansion of settlements. They say enough is enough.
Yes, they say enough is enough, and then they are shooting girls, and then they are taking into captivity young children. So I think we all know what's the nature of Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization proscribed here in the UK. And Hamas is launching this attack after a period in which Israel was trying to stabilize the situation. A period in which Israel tried to make the life of the people in Gaza better. But Hamas is not interested. We know that interested in trying to inflict pain on the civilians in Israel, but we also know that Hamas does not care about the civilians in Gaza, because Hamas is hiding behind civilian facilities in Gaza.
How big will the retaliation be? What is going to happen next? Will ground troops go into Gaza? We know there'll be a huge amount of bloodshed. Will civilians, inevitably, civilians will be killed?
So obviously we're not going to discuss the operational schemes right now, but I can tell you this, that there will be a very strong reaction. And like I said before, we will do everything needed to protect our families, because this is what we're doing right now. I want to again repeat the very hard situation in which we are confronted. We've got terrorists in our streets. Jonathan, imagine terrorists walking in the streets of Bristol. You get goosebumps for this. But this is what...
Why is he going about Bristol? But the only thing is that he's forgetting to mention, that's what he's saying is correct. But what he's not talking about is what about oppressing and going against international law and taking someone's land, and that aspect of it, which I know is not connected. The problem is yes, what the terrorists are doing, killing children and women and taking them and all that stuff, it's definitely wrong and is against Islamic scripture as well. And most religions, if not all religions, there's no validity for it. But that doesn't negate the other issue of the oppression that the state of Israel is putting on Palestine and not acting within international law of giving that land back. That is, it may not be fueling Hamas, because maybe Hamas just want to kill people like terrorists do, but it's certainly fueling, it may be fueling, their some of their reasoning, not all of them, because some of them, like I say, probably don't really care. Like a lot of people in power and position don't care about the civilians, the little people. Anyway, here's the next one.
Now, meanwhile, Israel's emergency services, MDA, issued an urgent appeal for blood donations at hospitals in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem and Haifa. There have been official confirmation of scores of death, but individual hospitals are issuing information suggesting the number could be far higher. And in response to the attacks, the IDF said it was launching a large-scale operation called Swords of Iron. It offered no detail as to what the operation involved, but we know the Israeli Air Force has been carrying out strikes in the Gaza Strip already this morning. They're still engaged in fighting within Israeli territory. On Saturday afternoon, they said, in 22 different places. The Israeli Prime Minister has said that the first objective is to clear out the hostile forces that infiltrated our territory. That's recognition of this extraordinary situation, one where Israel finds itself under occupation by Hamas and its citizens held hostage in Gaza.
Tom Cheshire reporting. Well, let's get more reaction to the fighting in Gaza and Israel. I'm joined by Kamal Hawash, Vice Chair, Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, who's in Birmingham for us this evening. Thanks for your time. Well, this action today condemned by world leaders, atrocious terrorist attacks is how our Foreign Secretary has described what has been going on. Do you condemn this incursion?
Look, that's the first.
Well, it's interesting that the Foreign Secretary wasn't asked for context. Why is it that this is taking place? So your reporter failed to actually get that context from him, because I must remind your viewers that in 1948, 1 million Palestinians were thrown out of their homeland. Israel was created against their will, facilitated by Britain, of course, after the Balfour Declaration, and that since then, Israel has oppressed the Palestinians on a daily basis. Even if your reporter had asked the Foreign Secretary what's been going on over the last 2 weeks, he should have said to him, well, Israel has been entering Palestinian cities, has been abducting Palestinians, imprisoning them, killing them, including children. More than 240 Palestinians have been killed since the beginning of the year. Also, it's allowed its settlers to roam in the West Bank, to terrorize and kill, particularly last night in the town of Hawara. And we come to Al-Aqsa Mosque, where Israeli settlers have been breaking into this Muslim shrine and performing prayers against what is called the status quo that has kept the peace there since 1967. So that is the context behind all of this. And I remind you also that in 1948, it was Zionist terrorism. They originated terrorism, if you want to refer to terrorism, that led to the expulsion of the Palestinian people, to massacres in Deir Yassin and Qibya and other places. So let's start with the context, and then we can talk about what happened today to see why it happens. And to that, ask the Foreign Secretary, what has Britain done to bring peace to the region, except to say it supports Israel's right to self-defense, but he didn't mention the Palestinians once.
But peace isn't going to come to the region, is it, by carrying out more terrorist atrocities, by going into kibbutz and carrying out massacres, by murdering civilians on the street, by kidnapping civilians? That's not going to bring a peaceful solution, is it?
Let me say to you, I don't want to see a single person die in this conflict. It's been going on for far too long. And what I don't want to do is to come back and speak to you in 2 years' time when there's another incident that you asked me to commentate on. But please don't just sort of give Israel a pass. Israel's army, the IDF, exercises terrorism on a daily basis against the Palestinian people. It has killed journalists like Shireen Abu Akleh. It killed medical people like Razan and Najjar. Even today, it attacked an ambulance in Gaza, and it injured, and I think it killed a nurse and the driver of the ambulance. So let us try and look at ways for this not to happen again, rather than just want me to say the words you want me to say about.
Okay.
About
well, how can we stop it happening again when Hamas is nothing more than a terrorist organisation, according to so many?
But you could have stopped at how can we stop it again? But you decided to add that bit to the sentence because you think that this will provoke me into saying something you want to report. No, our interest in the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and my interest as a Palestinian from Jerusalem who can't return to live in Jerusalem is in international law being applied, in Israel, in everyone remembering there's an illegal occupation of Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and that United Nations resolutions in their hundreds exist which say that these areas are illegally occupied. Israel must leave them. By the way, your reporter just said there's a border between Gaza and Israel. Why didn't you ask the Deputy Ambassador of Israel where Israel's borders are? It has no borders, and Belzel Smotrich, one of its ministers, stood in France behind the map of Greater Israel that included Jordan and parts of Egypt in it. So,
do you think Hamas wants peace? Do you think they want a peaceful solution, a two-state solution? Do Hamas actually even want that?
I think, first of all, the Palestinians want peace more than the Israelis do. That's an important thing to say, because we, as the Palestinians, are the oppressed people. We are the people whose rights have been trampled on. I meet refugees in Lebanon who have been there since 1948 and their children who just want to return and live in peace in their homeland. Sderot, for example, is a town that you've been reporting has been attacked. Do you know that it was created on the land of Najd, a Palestinian village, and that the residents of Najd were expelled into Gaza? So what they want, it's only a few kilometers away, is to return to their homeland. We want peace as the Palestinians, but it has to be a just peace, which allows the refugees to return. The settlers leave the occupied territories, and then we start to see peace prevailing. But you will not hear. You ask me about a two-state solution? Ask Benjamin Netanyahu if he supports a two-state solution, and he will tell you absolutely not on his watch.
How fearful are you about the retaliation that is coming?
I beg your pardon?
I said, how fearful are you about Israel's retaliation?
Well, Israel doesn't know peace, it knows war. And that is what Netanyahu said. So I do fear for the Palestinian people.
Okay, so we're going to move on there. But my only problem with some of these things is that why would a person, especially if they're a religious person, have a problem with, say, saying that Hamas is a terrorist organisation I mean, from the actions of what they did, they went in, they didn't kill military or combatant people, which you'd say an army would do, but they killed and took hostage of innocent people who got nothing to do with it, other than maybe being Israeli, and that is a terrorist organisation. So I don't understand why they don't have a problem with that. And what's the problem with the mosque? The mosque is a place of God. It shouldn't be a problem that anyone should be able to pray in a mosque, and people should be welcome to pray in a mosque. It's just this idea of
on Saturday, really, I want to
of people seeing people differently when we're actually human beings, all of us, and we've forgotten that. We just want to see the difference between each other, because one of us was born in one place, one of us is born in another place, and now we don't like each other when we're all human beings, and religious people should know better than anyone. Here's another one.
If it was just symbolic fire, to fire into open ground, but they targeted something deliberately. That said, it was an area that is contested. It's very different, of course, if they fire rockets towards northern cities in Israel. That didn't happen. So it may just be a symbolic gesture, but certainly the language that's coming from Hezbollah is they say that they will stand firm and they will stand side by side with Hamas in this fight with Israel.
Alex Rossi reporting there from Lebanon. Now, 2 Israeli tourists and their guide have been killed in a shooting at a tourist site in the Egyptian city of Alexandria. A policeman is alleged to have carried out the attack on a group of tourists in the Sawari district and is now in custody. The incident took place at the Pompey Pillar on Saturday. It's the first attack on Israelis in Egypt for decades.
Now it's spilling out.
An Israeli Defense Force spokesperson has accused Hamas militants of behaving like Islamic State group. In a statement, Daniel Hagari accused the organization, which governs Gaza, of the massacre of innocent civilians and described it as barbaric and brutal.
Israeli intelligence indicates that Hamas are hiding among Gazan civilians inside Gazan homes and schools, hospitals and mosques. Hamas behaves like ISIS. I repeat, Hamas behaves like ISIS. It's the same strategy to maximize civilian casualties in Gaza and Israel and make you all forget the massacre of hundreds of Israelis that started this war in the first place.
Well, joining me now is the former head of the IDF Intelligence Research Division, Yosef Kupavasser, who is in Tel Aviv this evening. Thank you very much for being with us. And I wonder if we could just start with the intelligence issue, because on the face of it, this is quite some failure.
It is a terrible failure from the intelligence community in Israel, that we're not able to, first of all, understand that this is what Hamas is up to. And it's not that Hamas is just trying to improve the conditions of the people of Gaza or improve its own condition or is deterred, but Hamas was up to this kind of murderous attack. And it remains a terroristic jihadic organization committed to killing as many Israelis and as many Jews as it can. And they were looking for the right moment, and they found one, unfortunately, because the intelligence was also not performing well in understanding the way of action that Hamas is going to use, which is an Iranian way of action of a swarm. And I think that something that is coming to Hamas from Iranian guidance. And they didn't manage to spot the Hamas people, Hamas terrorists, when they were underway to carry out this attack. And all of that caused the terrible havoc
does that
attack began.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. I wondered, does it shock you that an operation that was probably months, if not years, in the plan?
I'm not really interested in the logistics of these bits.
We had until the day before this attack took place, and we cannot allow.
Let's go to the next bit. because human people are dying. The security thing is a different story, I guess.
Of the hostages, so you don't think the fact that there are hostages being held there would limit the Israelis in what they are going to do next? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, unfortunately, I am worried when I say it myself, but this is the case. We don't have any other option. If we are going to be limiting our activities because of the hostages, we are not going to be able to achieve what we need to achieve. So we already paid something like 750 casualties, at least 700, as I see it written here. We paid a heavy price. We have nothing to lose now. We have to make sure that we get what we need to achieve. The country is united again in this mission, and the readiness of everybody to volunteer and to take part in making sure that this is the final outcome of this war is really very impressive. And I think we are going to do what needs to be done in order to, first of all, regain control of all these places where Hamas terrorists are still operating inside Israel, and simultaneously start charging heavy prices from Hamas, and eventually charging the prices that would make it clear to the Hamas and to the Iranians who stood behind it, financed them, guided them, supplied them with the weapons and all of that, to make sure that they understand that this was a huge mistake that they did.
Okay, Yosef Kupabasa, thank you very much. I appreciate your time this evening. I just want to show you some live pictures that we're getting in from a news conference which is being held by the parents of Israelis who've been taken captive by Hamas. They're speaking in Hebrew at the moment, but clearly a very traumatic moment this for those families, and that news conference taking place right now as the Israelis announce that 700 Israelis have now been killed.
Imagine to live like this. Okay, here's another one. Just forward a little bit to there was another interview, I think. Why do humans treat each other like this? Human beings are exactly the same as each other, just have different beliefs and different... Okay, I can't find anything on this one. Let's go to the next one.
Of a special meeting of the French and German governments. So that going on as well. So disruption at Hamburg airport, flights currently suspended to and from the airport while the police carry out searches of a plane there. Also, just a bit more we can bring you about the situation in Israel. The British government has been talking to journalists this morning. The main highlights from those conversations are that the UK continues to support the rights of Israel to take, in the UK government's words, proportionate action, acting within international law to bring an end to the violence. No plans to redeploy UK military assets to the region, and no plans to change their aid approach towards Palestinians as well. So that's the latest coming from the UK government. Well, to that top story, Israel ordering a complete siege of Gaza, imposing a total blockade of electricity, food and fuel, and in the last few minutes, water as well. These are the latest pictures, show the level of destruction in Gaza. This morning, Hamas has said that 4 Israeli hostages and their captors were killed. They are blaming Israeli airstrikes on Gaza. It comes after Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to destroy the military and governing capabilities of Hamas. Well, let's get more analysis. And joining me now is Yael Berder, who's an associate professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Very good to talk to you today, Dr. Berder. What is the mood in Israel today? There has been a little bit of time now for the horror of the events of Saturday to sink in, really.
Hi, thank you very much. These are incredibly dark days. Beyond the killing of over 700 Israelis, there's over 100 civilians that have been kidnapped to Gaza. And actually, I think it's most important to realize that this might be the most important involvement that we need, is to create the humanitarian corridor, to get out the children and the elderly and the injured that are there, first of all, before all of the military talk about revenge and retaliation and bombing. The most important part is to try and get people who are alive out.
What hope do you realistically have that that could be achieved?
I think that there has been entire complicity by the international community to allow this conflict to just take on the toll on civilians for decades. And now we're paying a price that is so high and so devastating. Whereas even in the country, and that's one aspect that people aren't talking about enough, that citizens feel abandoned by the government. Right now, it's citizens' networks that are actually getting the help out to people. People are looking for their loved ones. People are still don't know where their family members are, and they're not even there's no official numbers about who is dead and who is alive. But the most important action one can do now is not just to say we have blanket support for some military revenge, because revenge is not a policy. It's no way to end this conflict. We know that the conflict cannot be solved by military action alone. This is a political conflict. And so one of the things that I really want to urge the international community and people on the ground to do is to try and help us secure a pathway out for the civilians that are now trapped in Gaza.
Do you think there is? Sorry,
the heinous war crimes that the Hamas fighters carried out yesterday, they do not justify more war crimes by the Israeli military. And there has been a blockade on Gaza for 15 years. There is time now to say we need a political solution to this. No longer revenge and holy war. No longer allowing the leadership of extremists that care nothing for the civilians to make there is no policy even. It's just either war or managing the conflict while looting and really not taking responsibility for the future of Israeli citizens and our children, and of Palestinian civilians and their children. And it's high time that everyone got involved to say this is enough. End the occupation, end the blockade, bring those that make the war that made the war crimes yesterday of the Hamas to justice, and finish and do not create more war crimes this day. What's most important is to secure the borders now, to regain a sense of security for the civilians who have been abandoned.
Dr. Berda, we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, because we're out of time, but we hear what you're saying and your impassioned words. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Yael Berda from Hebrew U. Just quickly to let...
Okay, we've just got a few more now.
For this two-state solution, but just in terms of the tactics that we saw on the ground.
That was a very good one, that one.
Response from the US military with plans to move US Navy ships and military aircraft closer to Israel as a sign of support. Our US correspondent Mark Stone joins me now from the White House. And Mark, this is quite some significant move by the Americans.
It is indeed. A task force, a naval task force, is now on its way to the eastern Mediterranean, where it will remain off the coast of Israel, off the coast of Gaza. This is a task force that includes the USS Gerald Ford, an aircraft carrier, and with that, 4 guided missile destroyers and 1 guided missile cruiser. So 6 ships, a flotilla, an aircraft carrier will always be deployed with a number of other ships as well. But this is a significant move by the Americans. It is defensive in posture. I think it's a sign to show regional players who might feel they want to get involved in this, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Syria perhaps, or indeed the Iranians themselves, that the Americans are there, that they have Israel's back. Clearly, it is a very, very significant move by President Biden to make this decision. There are a huge number of sailors on board those ships. The Gerald Ford on its own has a complement of 4,000 sailors. It has about 70 planes on board, perhaps more. And planes too extra planes are being sent to the region. Fighter jets are being sent to the region as well. So a clear posture by the Americans, and the Pentagon has said that this is part of several steps to strengthen their posture in the region, to bolster regional deterrence efforts. So it remains to be seen whether these assets, as they call them, will be used as part of Israel's offense in Gaza. I would think that is very unlikely, but they are there if things spiral out of control, and I think that is certainly probable. The presence, Mark, of an aircraft carrier is also useful in a humanitarian sense because it can be used to evacuate large numbers of people if it comes to that, either Israelis or Palestinians. And clearly in Gaza there are many, many Palestinians who Prime Minister Netanyahu has said must leave. Of course they can't because Gaza is a closed enclave.
Mark, outside the White House, thank you. More from Mark Austin in Jerusalem shortly. Meanwhile, the intense violence we've witnessed over the past 2 days has sparked fears of an escalation to a wider regional conflict.
Okay, there was one more, I think. It was a lady. It was a really good one.
Yes, I did look at the reviews.
Yesterday's surprise attack. Let's get reaction from Ben Jamal, director of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, who joins us now. Very good afternoon to you. Let's talk about what's going on specifically, can we, in Gaza right now? Because as we were talking to Mark Stone, people there are potentially worried about what might happen with the ground invasion potentially imminent, and many presumably wanting to get out, will they?
Well, yes. So let's remember for context that Gaza has been subject to an illegal blockade by Israel for 16 years now. There are over 2 million people living in Gaza, 50% of whom are under 18, are children. And the consequences of the siege under which they're living is that they are denied freedom of movement. Israel controls who goes in and who goes out. They're denied access to the basic materials and supplies they need to live meaningful life. Some of your viewers will recall that the UN in 2012 said that unless the siege were lifted, Gaza wouldn't be fit for human habitation by 2020. We're 3 years on from that. So that's the context in terms of what is happening in Gaza. Now, yesterday, Benjamin Netanyahu issued a statement in which he said civilians in Gaza needed to leave because Israel was about to launch an assault that would turn Gaza into a desert and would destroy every corner of Gaza. Now, the reality is, of course, whilst Israel maintains this blockade, people in Gaza cannot leave, as you just said yourself. So what we have yesterday, and unfortunately I think this has been green-lighted by some of the statements from our political leaders about Israel's right to defend itself using whatever force necessary. What we have is a commitment, effectively, by the Israeli leader to kill hundreds, if not thousands, of Palestinian civilians.
Yet people in Gaza will pay the price ultimately, won't they?
Well, the people in Gaza and the people across Palestine have been paying the price for decades. And again, it's worth establishing some context because we've heard a lot of commentators, a lot of our political leaders describing what happened yesterday as something unprovoked, as if it came from nowhere. But the reality is the offensive launched from Gaza yesterday can only be properly understood in the context of Israel's ongoing, decades-long illegal military occupation of Palestinian land, colonization of Palestinian land. So Palestinians have paid that price for decades. Netanyahu said yesterday Israel is now at war with Palestinians, but Israel has been imposing a decades-long war on Palestinians, sustaining a military occupation that can only be sustained over a people who choose not to be occupied and who choose to resist.
The thing is, it doesn't help, does it, when the leader of Hamas comes out and threatens to take this outside Gaza, move the disputes or their action to the West Bank and other areas of Israel?
Well, this is not, again, and the framing here, as happens when there is what is defined as an escalation of violence, which either means Israel is killing Palestinians in huge numbers or Palestinians are killing Israelis, and suddenly then the world's attention is focused on this. But this is not a conflict between Israel and Hamas, or Israel and the people of Gaza. The context here is the imposition of a military occupation and a system of oppression over all of the people of Palestine, including those in Gaza, including those living under military occupation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and including Palestinians who live as unequal citizens of the state, all of which meets the definition of apartheid. And it's not just me saying that, it's not just Palestinian civil society saying that. That has been affirmed in recent years by Amnesty International, by Human Rights Watch. Indeed, 2 weeks ago, even the ex-head of Mossad, Israel's security service, said we have to acknowledge we're practicing the crime of apartheid over Palestinians. So this is not just about a situation in Gaza. In the week before,
just very quickly, sorry, Mr. Jamal, we are running out of time, but the trouble is with this, any attempts or any hopes of peace have been shattered now. So what Palestinians want certainly pushed further down the line.
Well, again, if we say the hopes of peace, that sort of suggests that somehow there was peace before the events of yesterday. But in this year alone, so since the beginning of 2023, Israel's already killed over 240 Palestinians, mostly in the West Bank, including 45 children. Palestinians have been subject to numerous assaults by Israeli settlers. 17 Palestinian villages set ablaze in 1 week earlier this year by Israeli settlers encouraged by Israeli forces. So Palestinians are not living under peace. Palestinians are living under the imposition of an ongoing war, an ongoing military occupation. Violence is not going to end.
We'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Time has beaten us.
Of violence, which is the ongoing military occupation and system of oppression.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Jamal. It's good to see you there.
Thank you.
They didn't like the way the story was going, I guess. I don't know if I've got the lady then. There was this lady that... I suppose we're into this one. If I don't get a chance, take it easy, God bless in peace. I'll see if I can find the lady. She was talking about it from, you know, like that other lady, actually. Both the ladies, actually, were the best speakers of this, talking about it from both sides, which is the truth. It's not good for Israel citizens, not good for Palestinian citizens, not good for human beings. That's the thing we're forgetting. We're all human beings. That's this I wanted to show it, not because I'm not going to stand on the sides. The thing is, we're human beings, and we shouldn't be fighting with each other about anything, especially land or all these stupid man-made systems that we've been brought up to believe. We shouldn't be dying for these things. We should be living in harmony with each other, helping each other, and that's not like some utopian kumbaya. That's the way that we should be, and there's no reason why we shouldn't. Why should we just accept the way that we live like this? It's just amazing to see, any future generation that sees this, or alien species comes down and see how we act in the so-called Holy Land, how human beings can do, whichever side, whatever tag you put on the human being that they've been born and brought into, to follow, that they could do such heinous things to each other, to humanity.
Says to all the victims, both Israelis and Palestinians, innocent civilians that were killed. Obviously, me and my colleagues, my companions in Hadash, we've always opposed any assault on innocent civilians, and the carnage, the massacre, the war crime that was inflicted on the south of Israel by Hamas, we have to be very blunt. This is a carnage, a war crime, a crime against humanity that cannot be accepted whatsoever. At the same time, I would like to add another two things. First, we have to see the context. And I have to emphasize, I must emphasize, by explaining the context, I do not intend whatsoever to legitimize or to justify the carnage that was carried out by Hamas. But the occupation, the ongoing occupation of the Palestinian people for more than 50 years, and especially under this government of Netanyahu and Ben Gvir, this fanatic, racist, fascist government, in the last few months, on a daily basis, there have been pogroms against the Palestinians in the West Bank. And of course, this is in addition to a killing and the death toll of the Palestinians since the beginning of the year under this government has never been so high. And we've been warning time and time again that the occupation that takes the lives of thousands of Palestinians also takes the lives of Israelis. And we warned that that reality cannot continue. It was going to erupt. The writing was on the wall, written in blood. But the government, this fanatic government, didn't want to listen. This arrogant government thought that the occupation can be managed. No, it cannot. It should be ended for the sake of Palestinians and Israelis alike. And I want to do that. That's the first point. The second point, this incursion into Gaza, the assault on Gaza, which will take and already took the toll of again many innocent civilians, and we oppose any assault on civilians, both in Israel and in the Palestinian occupied territories and Gaza, which is under an ongoing siege. It's a huge ghetto. So we oppose all of those. And I'm more warning, and I'm calling upon the international community. There is a possibility to stop the bloodshed. More violence against Gaza will not give a solution and security for either side, not the Israelis nor the Palestinians. There's only one solution: ending the occupation and reaching a just peace solution. A Palestinian independence, a Palestinian independent state.
Thank you.
Beyond the state of Israel. That's the only solution.
I totally understand your points, and there's just many pushbacks I have. I mean, first, I just have to say that, you said at the top, in no way would you ever want to justify the carnage, though part of your answer that followed at least had elements of justification to it.
Absolutely
But my bigger question, forgive me, you described the Israeli government and Prime Minister, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I heard you describe them as racist. Do you therefore also describe Hamas, given their actions, quite clearly as in the same terms, or I hope much, much worse?
Yes, indeed, for sure. And please, I would appreciate if you wouldn't ascribe anything to the things I said. There was no even bit of justification to this carnage. Look, we have to distinguish between the goal and the means.
I understand that, but can I just forgive me? Maybe I'll make it simpler then. But you might not be trying to justify it, but you almost suggested that this sort of attack of some sort was inevitable.
It was inevitable, not to the extent that there is anything that illegitimate in that. Absolutely not. I was very, very clear, and if I wasn't, I will say again, this carnage, this massacre is a huge war crime, a crime against humanity. Indeed, there are racist ideas and racist deeds in the Hamas organization, and even worse than that. I saw pictures, I saw photos, I've got messages from many friends in the south of Israel. Unfortunately, a very good friend of mine from one of the kibbutzim around Gaza wrote to me WhatsApp that she was never so afraid, and I think this was the last words she wrote in her life, because she, just a few minutes after she wrote to me, a very good friend of mine, she was butchered with her husband by Hamas. So what I'm saying is with a great pain, but there's no justification whatsoever. I saw pictures that reminded me of the Holocaust from the southern of Israel. There were Nazi elements in this carnage. No human being can accept and tolerate such a thing. But what I'm saying is that everyone, but especially we as politicians, as leaders, we are committed to the well-being of our people. And in order to achieve this well-being for Palestinians and Israelis alike, we must be rational. We should not act upon our guts, but upon our mind. And that means ending the occupation. Now, inevitable, it's not because such a carnage was, again, accepted, but inevitable to the extent that people that live under a brutal occupation for so many years cannot and will not just stand still without doing anything. History teaches us that. That doesn't mean that such a carnage should have been occurred. Absolutely not. Never.
Forgive me, Ofer, just because we have a couple of minutes left, and I just wanted to round things off by asking you whether you believe that it is likely but right for Israel not to respond now and potentially involving ground troops. I mean, do you think that is likely, and do you think that would be right? I get the history and how you are trying to frame it, but the reality is 2 days old. And there was a brutal ground attack on Israeli territory. Do you think that a legitimate response does not involve something similar?
It's not a matter, first of all, it's not legitimate to assault innocent civilians. And as you mentioned before, I think, with one of the former interviewed, I think that you said that Gaza is so crowded that there's no way to attack without killing a huge amount of civilians. This is not legitimate. But as I said before, and I would like to say again, it's not what I'm interested in is to put an end to the bloodshed. I want both peoples of the land, Palestinians and Israelis, Arabs and Jews and all the others. I want everybody to live in peace, in prosperity, and in security. And the attack on Gaza is not going to deliver that. The only thing that may deliver security and prosperity to both peoples is a peace, a just peace, accords between Israel and the Palestinians, and that means a total end to the occupation. Mm-hmm. But nothing justifies such a carnage that we saw 2 days ago. Nothing at all whatsoever.
Ofer, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Oh God, this is the thing. They always will make the Palestinians have to, jump through these hoops, and that they. Well, I don't need to really add, is it? You could hear what was going on, and how it was done. I can't find that lady. It's here, is it? But yeah, you could see how the interviewer wanted him to say Hamas is a terrorist organisation, and why are you justifying it? Which, he quite clearly said many, many times that he wasn't justifying it. He was just, talking about reality, and that seemed to be a problem, to try and suggest that, well, what was the cause for this? Was there a cause for it? Do you think there was just no cause for it? I mean, in the sense that, there's no legitimacy for it, yes, which is what he said. But there must have been a cause. We all believe in cause and effect, and we all know that certain things cause other things. So for him to sort of say, well, by you mentioning that, what could have caused it, you're suddenly now defending it, when he quite clearly said he wasn't defending it, he was just giving historical context. But you could see how the journalists, they're always running out of time when they get to making this argument, not answering their questions. Anyway, I'll see if I can find that other bit. I think that's enough anyway. You could see like how messy it is from both sides. The problem is like it's easy for me to say that from this side. Imagine how I would be if I was living in Gaza or in Israel with these things happening. From a human point of view, how terrible it is to have that fear. We shouldn't be living in this fear. We shouldn't be having this ability to create this fear for each other. Take care, take it easy, God bless, and peace.
Force to the region.
Hi, so I found the lady I was talking about. You just heard me say, take care, take it easy, God bless, peace. It's just a little bit more, so I'm going to tack this on at the end when I edit it with the front image, so you can hear the lady speak now.
The latest on what the Americans are planning to do. Let me bring you up to date with what's going on here. Up to 700 Israelis have now reportedly been killed in the attacks by Hamas militants, which began yesterday morning. The fighting inside Israel continues this evening, as does the country's retaliatory strikes against Gaza. The Palestinian Health Ministry says at least 370 people have been killed there. Well, let's speak now to Sally Abed, leader of the Jewish-Palestinian protest group Omdim Bayached, which I think means Standing Together movement. Thank you very much for being with us, Sally. And, well, there's not much standing together going on at the moment. What is your view of these awful events?
I think we are still in shock. A lot of us are still processing the loss and are still waiting, for so many of our partners on the ground, peace, anti-occupation activists, social justice activists who have been impacted by this, who have been kidnapped, who have lost loved ones, who have lost their lives. And you would be surprised, we are really at a very polarizing moment here within Israel. People forget that there is a Palestinian society as well within Israel. And we are impacted, all of us, by these horrific images. And we are really at a place where we're trying to understand how this will affect us beyond the south and beyond the Hamas attacks, and really try to understand how we won't repeat, a much more severe May 2021 events of mixed cities, where we really saw also a very, very brutal intercommunal violence. And we're really trying to understand, what are the worst case scenarios that we will get, with Lebanon in the north, in the south with Hamas, and really in our mixed cities. It's a very confusing, very, very painful times.
Yeah, Sally, it's easy to forget that there are people working towards peace in this country. But right now, while you have Hamas in control of Gaza, mounting terror attacks like this, and while you have a right-wing government with, apparently little interest in pursuing a peace process, what can you do? The peace process and peace itself is a distant idea at the moment.
Absolutely. I say it and it just seems so far away right now to think about these things when you have two extremist, two illegitimate, leaderships on both sides who really have no interest in our security. And I think what we are able to do at the moment is just understand how we can strengthen our solidarity, strengthen our, communities in here in order to retaliate any kind of polarizing, and escalating violence in here. And other than that, we really feel very helpless. And honestly, I just plea everyone, sorry. Everyone that's watching.
Sally, take your time.
We are people who live here. It's not, don't choose sides. Let's allow us to mourn and grieve and really feel the pain for both people who share this homeland. And let's remember that, and let's remember that we're all sharing this pain, and we might have different experiences of what's happening, but at the end of the day, the majority of the people who live here are people who deserve peace, and none of the leaders on both sides have an interest in that at the moment. And honestly, just looking at the moment and hearing all the support for the Israeli government, or for the legitimization of the Hamas attack, is just baffling. It's really very difficult for us here on the ground to really understand how we can impact the international conversation towards the interests of both of the people here. And I hope that my message will get clear, and I hope that we will get more platforms, not just the politicians and the diplomats talking, but the people on the ground who are really trying to grab any kind of hope and any kind of solidarity and any kind of strength for us to really maintain some kind of hope and maintain some kind of belief for a future for us here.
Well, I mean, hope is important, but when you see what has been going on here in the last 48 hours, do you have any hope for the future here at all?
That's a very difficult question to ask right now. Usually my answer would be yes. I believe in the power of people. I believe in what's happening right now is really historic. It's gonna be a very, very dark corner in the history of Israel-Palestine, and it might regress us in many ways. And I do believe that all the efforts that are going to the military aid right now, that's equal amount of efforts, if not more, is going to go to strengthen us here on the ground, both in Israel and in Palestine. I'm sorry.
Sally, thank you very much for coming on. No, don't worry at all. Thank you very much for coming on our program. We appreciate your time. Thank you. And just a little bit of breaking news in the last few moments, and that is that the government in the UK has asked all UK government buildings to fly the Israeli flag and use what they call appropriate coloured lighting to mark yesterday's terrorist attack and show solidarity with its victims. I
thought that was a bit unnecessary of the government. And it may backfire by doing that and just cause extra tension here that doesn't need to be here. I get the idea of showing solidarity against a terrorist event, but of course the problem is then it makes you question, one minute, so you're putting Israel flag there because of the terrorist event, yeah, that's fine. But wait a minute, the days before, the 16 years or the 48 years or whatever it is of Israel breaking international law and not allowing Palestine to have its own place, you haven't done anything about that. There's no flags of Palestine coming up there. You probably didn't even recognise it for a long time. So that's the problem by you're choosing a side there. And yeah, I get why they're doing it. It's just because it's such a very difficult, messy situation, the history and the interwoven ideas of Israel and Palestine. But obviously, we know the West is always going to go on the side of Israel, but it is problematic when you hear these people talk about how life is like in Gaza and how countless UN resolutions and international laws are not being followed by Israel. And if that is true, if that's the case, then that's a problem for the international community then backing a country doing that. Because if it was Iran doing it, or China or Russia, a country going, siding would say, well, no, how can you when they have so many violations of international law? But when you're doing the same thing, this is the problem. The problem is the powerful people, the people in power, are the ones causing this problem. And we're following these people. Anyway, that was what I wanted to give you. Take care, take it easy, God bless, and peace.